Hello everyone, welcome to this video on demand forecasting. In this video, we'll go through basic terminology and some understanding about why we need to use demand forecasting in operations management. So the term demand forecasting, I believe, is very familiar. So when you look into the weather for the day, for the week, what you're looking into forecast, in this case, weather forecast. So why you look into weather? So that you make a more informed decision before you go out, so that you have a right gear with you. So in winter, especially in Saskatchewan, you don't want to go out without proper clothes, right? So the same applies when it comes to managing operations for any organization. The demand forecast provides you essential data or the essential information so that you can plan your operations better. The demand forecasts are usually generated by sales and marketing teams. So then the question is why, as operations managers, you should worry about it. So in order to explore this, let's take an example of a bakery. I will not draw the entire transformation process, but let's look from a higher level. So sales and marketing team, they will produce forecast for a particular product or group of products, such as bread, cakes, buns, whatever items are produced in a bakery. However, we need this information, the demand for next week, next month, next year, if we talk about longer term, so that we can arrange the inputs better. Because in order to produce this end product, we need certain inputs, such as raw material, packaging supplies, right? Workforce or the human resources. Okay. So knowing demand in advance from the OM viewpoint, we can prepare our operations better in order to fulfill the future demand for the consumers. It will also allow me to schedule the maintenance, right? I don't want to be blindly taking my machines off maintenance, especially during the peak periods, right? Also, from the inventory management viewpoint, knowing what's the future demand and what I have on hand, I have more visibility across my organization to make sure we have right level of inventories. So I hope that this makes sense why the demand forecasting is important from operations management viewpoint, even though the demand forecasts are generated by sales and marketing team. So that's a view of a larger organization. For smaller businesses, it may end up in your plate, right, as operations manager, where you need to look into the demand forecast. So now let's look at the terms and definitions so that we are on the same page when we use these terms. So demand, sales of a product, usage of part or material. So in a bakery example, sales of cakes, bread, biscuits, whatever items you're manufacturing. Forecasting, estimation of future event or predicting how much we're going to sell in coming week, coming month, coming year, and so on. So when we put this together, so demand forecasting is the estimation of demand expected over a future period. So I'm using a generic term here, future period, because later on in next slide we'll talk about predicting for shorter time span, medium time span, or the longer time span. So we'll explicitly define that. So why demand forecasting? In very simple term, demand forecasting provides us or the operations manager information about the future demand, and we can control and direct our operations better. So let's explore this further based on the time horizons. So the term time horizon defines the range of time period we are forecasting for. How further ahead we want to look into future, right? So 3 time horizons: long, medium, and short. The long term demand, 5 years or more, so which basically helps you to make longer term strategic decisions, such as predicting demand for a particular region or a country so that we can open new facilities in that country. Some of the examples would entail such as predicting what kind of products are going to be more popular in the coming years, right? So you can align your operations better to serve the demand for those products. The second level of forecasting is the medium-term demand forecasting, which is 12 months or more. So medium-term demand forecast helps organizations in building the aggregate production planning. So when I say aggregate production planning, at this point, we are not looking into the individual product demand. So for a bakery, if we are producing, let's say, 5 or 6 different types of breads, I want to look into the aggregate demand for all those 6 types of breads. So this will allow me to plan for the inventories of ingredients, raw material, packaging material, and as well as for the workforce going ahead for the 1 year or more. The third one is short-term demand, which is weekly, monthly, or even daily basis, right? So knowing shorter-term demand is again very important for the organizations. Let's take a few examples. For instance, for the McDonald's, Tim Hortons, knowing daily demand is very important because I don't have bigger space where I can store lots of material in order to serve weekly or monthly demand. So usually you will see the shipments or especially for the baked goods, they are receiving these items sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, right? So which means I need to have very tight control on short-term demand. Even for a manufacturing firm where we have bigger facilities, you don't want to have material sitting on the shop floor waiting to be processed because it adds to the material cost, it adds to the inventory cost. Also, sitting material on the shop floor can lead to quality issues, right? So it's very important to control the shorter term demand too, especially when it comes to products which has a limited shelf life. So from the operations viewpoint, the longer term demand forecast allows operations managers to make a decision on facilities and their location. At medium term, we can predict our workforce size, inventory levels going ahead for 12 months. And so shorter term allows operations to better control and direct their inventories, workforce, so that we are running more efficient and effective without incurring too much costs. So before we dig into some of the forecasting methods, let's look into some of the common features of demand forecasting. So it doesn't matter which model you use, these features will stand true. For demand forecasting, we assume there is a causal system, so which means the data in the past is a good representation of future events. So for a beer manufacturer, we know that there's going to be a spike in demand for the summer months, and in the winter the demand goes low. So there's always some causal system. So the idea here is to understand that causal system and use proper model to predict the future. Forecasts are rarely perfect. I would say never perfect. In my experience, you always have some error, right? Which is due to the randomness or the random nature of the real environment. So randomness represents the uncertainty in the real life. So it is very difficult to model the randomness in the system, right? So there's always going to be an error from the demand forecasting viewpoint, as the difference between actual, so which means actual sales that's being made, minus forecast. So the idea here is to decrease the forecast error by using different techniques. So just a quick note here, if you are always over predicting, which means my forecast is always greater than actual demand, so I will end up having inventories sitting in the warehouse or inventory sitting on the production floor which I'm not able to sell. On the other hand, if my forecast is always less than actual, I will always run out of items, so which will have an impact on the customer service level, right? So again, we always want to minimize the forecast error. The forecasts are more accurate for groups versus individuals. So one example here is at grocery stores, when it comes to, let's say, forecasting the demand for milk. So instead of forecasting for milk 3%, 2%, 1%, and 0%, it's always better to forecast collectively for this for this family, right? Which is milk as one product. So which will cancel out some of the randomness in the system. So the example of randomness here would be where somebody take a 2% bottle of milk and next time he purchases 1%. I will not go into further more details because there's also aspect of a buffer, which such as your fridge at the home. So let's say as a buyer, if I always buy 1% bottle of milk and 2%, it depending upon how much I have consumed at home, which could be a purely random event. For instance, I was working from home on 1 week, and next week I was traveling, I was not at home at all, right? So those random events can lead to inaccuracies in the forecast. So however, forecasting for a family or group of products will cancel out those inaccuracies. It can enhance the forecast results. The forecasting accuracy decreases as the time horizon increases. So as we move into future, the randomness increases too, right? So there's more uncertainty as we go far and far in future. The same thing when you look at the weather forecast. When you look at the weather forecast, the next few hours weather is always more accurate. Otherwise, it's always tend to change, right? So as we go into future, due to the randomness, due to the uncertainties, the forecasts become less accurate. The longer term horizon forecast is always going to be far more less accurate than short term forecast. So here's the definition of time horizon, right? So what we said earlier, the forecasting horizon is the range of time period we are forecasting for. So here are the elements of a good forecast. Timeliness is very important. So the nature of decision will determine the timeliness of the forecast that you're trying to generate. For longer term decisions, I need to look into 5 years or ahead. On the other hand, for the scheduling, inventory planning related decisions, I will rely on a shorter time period, such as weeks, months, and so on. It must be accurate. Again, we are not going to have 100% accuracy, but the idea here is to decrease the forecast error by using various forecasting techniques. So whatever method you choose for forecasting, it must be reliable, which means it should work consistently. One of the things you will understand from the real life, you may end up changing the forecasting method due to the influence of various events. One of the best example on this one is I cannot use the data from the lockdown period to predict the demand of commodities for groceries for the coming months, because the time series or the data for this particular period is distorted, right? For certain items the demand was sky high, for other items the demand was dropped, right? So such as toilet paper rolls, I cannot use that demand or the data from the panic period to predict the future, because this will not be a right representation, right? So the law goes in when it comes to the selecting the right type of data, so which may lead to some of your methods not being reliable on consistent basis, right? So we will not explore this further, because the idea of this course is to only introduce you to basic techniques. However, when you come to COM 395, which is business forecasting and predictive analytics, then you explore all these dimensions. You should use meaningful units. For a production manager, I would be interested in looking into how many units we are going to sell. As a financial manager, you are going to forecast as a dollar value. As a human resources guy, you may want to look into the number of people, right? As a projection, which means number of layoffs, number of new hires. That is what you're predicting. It must be in writing. We are not generating numbers here. There needs to be some explanation associated with that number. It must be cost effective, easy to understand. So cost effective part, as you use complex methods, you need to collect more data. More data means there needs to be more data cleansing. You need to prepare your data before you can go ahead and do the forecast, so which can increase the overall cost of the forecasting process. So from this course viewpoint, you should know these elements, because as I said, I will not be asking you to apply these, which may lead to data cleansing, those kind of activities. So I will already provide you the data sets which are already cleansed and ready to use, and I will ask you to apply a specific technique for the forecast. So that brings us to the end of the basic terminology associated with forecasting process. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach me out. Thank you for your time, and I will see you guys in the next video.